Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you had a wonderful September. I, for one, have just become aware of the fact that it is the end of September and not like September 3rd. What? Before we get started, feel free to like and subscribe, turn on notifications. At this point, I've been doing YouTube for almost a year and I still have no idea what's going on. So really, it's in your hands at this point. I'm excited to show you what I read in September. I read a lot of good books. I read a lot of chonky books. My reading selection has no rhyme or reason to it this month, and I'm kind of okay with that. I feel like October is a good month to have like a spooky theme. September was just a good month to have like a what is happening in my life theme, which is exactly what happened. So we're gonna jump in. I'm gonna tell you all the books that I read in September. Very excited to share these with you. And of course, as always, make sure to leave me a comment and let me know if you read any of these books or if you're interested in reading any of these books. So let's get started. All right, so first up, we have Crying in Hmart, which is by Michelle Zauner. This is a memoir. It deals with Michelle's, kind of like Michelle's coming-of-age story, dealing with her, it talks a lot about her childhood, but it also talks about her in her mid-20s when she finds out that her mother has cancer and just like working with her father and her mom to like, you know, try to battle the cancer and just kind of her trying to figure out who she is as a person. Interestingly enough, it reminded me a lot of Yoke, which is a fiction book, which is a book that I talked about a lot earlier in the year that I really, really loved. It's an interesting book because the first half of the book, I was like, you know what, this isn't like super tugging at my heartstrings necessarily, but I liked the writing and I liked the commentary it was making on growing up. But then by the second half, I mean, I was a complete mess. It is a very challenging book to read. It deals with like a lot of adult subject matter. It deals really heavily with like the really difficult, challenging parts of battling cancer. It's a challenging book to read, and I only recommend reading it if you're in the right headspace for it, because it is a really like heartbreaking story that, I mean, you will go on this journey with her, and it's not just heartbreaking from like the cancer perspective, it's also just heartbreaking from like a family perspective, and talking about, you know, families and what keeps them together and what splits them apart, and all of that was very it's hard to read, even though it's hard to read because it is so relatable. This book is absolutely stunning. It was just really, really gorgeous book. It was a pretty quick read, but it is a book that I had to take like multiple breaks. I couldn't just read it straight through. I had to take breaks because it's very heartbreaking and it's a huge struggle. And, you know, if you have parents or a parent who has dealt with like medical issues or is dealing with medical issues, this book is a very challenging read. So I will say that, but I mean, it was absolutely fantastic. It just is a book. Make sure you're in the right headspace. I would, if you're someone who has certain triggers, I would look up trigger warnings before reading this book, because it's a lot, but it is excellent and definitely worth the read. So that was Crying in Hmart. Next up, I read The First Sister, which was by Linden A. Lewis. So First Sister is kind of a hard book to describe. I mean, I can tell you that it's sci-fi. The First Sister, it deals kind of with three perspectives. The First Sister character is a character who she's like kind of like almost like a space nun is the best way I can describe it. She's not allowed to talk. She's kind of there to do the bidding of whoever the captain of the ship is. Kind of deals with like warring nations on different planets and kind of like control for the galaxy. And so it's got this like space opera side. It also is like delightfully queer. There's a lot of like queer representation in the book that's done really, really well. And so it's just like this kind of compelling like character drama, but set in space with like really interesting like sci-fi elements. So a couple things about this book. I read this directly after reading Sky Without Stars. I wish I had not done that. They were so similar. And despite the fact this had great representation, and honestly, this is probably the better written of the two. I liked Sky Without Stars so much that it kind of overshadowed how I felt about this book. So this is a book I would want to reread, not having that in my head, because it was just too similar, and I shouldn't have read them back to back. That was a poor choice on my part. So that being said, I thought the characters in this book were really interesting. I thought the actual sci-fi elements were super interesting. There were some like plot devices and some like mechanics of the story that I felt were really weird. Like every once in a while, I felt like characters would just like almost teleport. Like you'd be with them one moment, and then the next moment they'd be on a completely different planet. And like that skip was sometimes really jarring for me. One of my biggest complaints, and it's super nitpicky, so just bear with me. One of the characters, Hero, their entire story is told through like audio logs. So they have chapters that are just their audio logs that one of the other characters is like listening to. The problem is that they're not written like audio logs. They're written like prose, which it was very jarring for me, because I'm like, isn't this supposed to be an audio log? But they were written as if it was just writing another character. So I almost wish they weren't like presented as audio logs. I wish they had just been presented as like a third character's perspective. because it kind of took me out of the story, because I was like, this is not how an audio log would look or sound or anything, because it was like written in like very like almost like flowery prose. I'm like, no one records an audio log like this, like especially when they're in a really stressful situation. I don't know, it like really threw me out of the story every time there was one of those chapters. And what's ironic is I thought Hero actually had probably the most interesting story of all of them, or one of the most interesting stories. And yet the way their chapters were presented was like completely jarring for me. Overall, I get the hype. I get why this book was so many people liked it. I don't know. I think I need to reread it when it's not so close to another sci-fi book, because for me, Sky Without Stars was a lot more fun. This was a little bit more on the drama side. I think the characters in the story and the sci-fi elements are really cool, but there's just like a lot of structural things about the story, how the story is told, and how the characters are portrayed, and how like characters kind of just jump from one place to another, that really threw me off and made it kind of hard for me to just really get invested in this story. I will say I loved like the first third, and I loved the last third. The middle third of the book was kind of a struggle for me to get through, because there was just like a lot of like jumping around. I felt like it was a little hard to follow. So that is First Sister. Please read some reviews on Goodreads or Storygraph if you're looking to pick this up, because a lot of people really love this book. And that's why I'm not saying like I loved it or hated it, because there were just like a lot of little things that made it hard for me to really truly enjoy it. And I think it's one that I will eventually reread to try and like really get the full impact of it. Speaking of Sky Without Stars, right after I read that, I read Between Burning Worlds, which is the sequel to Sky Without Stars, a pretty thick book. This follows the events of Sky Without Stars, which is basically like Space Les Mis by Victor Hugo. I really loved that book, but I liked this book even more because it sort of like gets away from the Les Mis parts of the story. So I shouldn't say that. Like all of the groundwork of this story is set in Les Mis, and like in a space version, like a sci-fi version of Les Mis. But this one takes those characters, adds new characters who, surprisingly, for being characters added in a second book, the characters that were added in this book were fantastic. Like, I really enjoyed them. I oftentimes wish that we were getting their perspective as well, because I thought they were so interesting. But this story really like kind of like spins off on its own, and it really like, you know, there's something to be said for like a retelling is great, but a retelling is only as good as so much of what will make you love a retelling sometimes is based on how much you love the original, right? And being able to see those moments, being like, oh my God, that reminds me of the original. That reminds me of the original. This doesn't have that as much, because they kind of spin it off into their own story and create this, like really build upon this world, which was such a good choice for the sequel, because really the world they create and the way that they spin it off is even more compelling than the original story, which I already loved, the first book. So the fact that they made it even more interesting, more intricate, gave more elements to this world, I thought it was great. These books they're really light reading. They're thick books, but they're very easy reads. I just started the third book, so that will be one of my first books for October, just because I want to finish the trilogy before I forget what's happening in it. But they read like a good summer action movie. And I think that's just great. Like, they're just really fun reads with really great characters. And when the characters succeed or like pull something off, you're like, yeah. When something like sets them back, you're like, no. You know, like you can almost picture yourself in a theater, like getting excited or like, you know, like having these like visceral reactions. So I don't want to give too much away, because saying too much about this book would spoil the first book. But it really is excellent to continue following these characters. The new characters that are introduced are phenomenal, super, super interesting. The new elements of the world that are introduced, the twists are really great. There's a lot of really good twists and turns and really great character moments. All in all, I really, really loved this book, and I'm so excited to finish the trilogy, which I just started today. All right, so next up, I read a book talk favorite. Everybody's talking about it right now, and that was The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. Now, I'm going to tell you what I told you. If you watch my TikToks, you may have seen my review of this on TikTok. I have since changed my opinion a little bit on the book, and I'll explain why. So The Love Hypothesis is supposedly, though I haven't done a lot of research on this, but supposedly it's a Rey and Kylo Ren fanfic that was turned into like a story about two scientists. I haven't done a lot of research on that, so take that with a grain of salt. Maybe do your own research on that. But essentially, would take that out of the mix. This is a fake dating to lovers story. It's a story about a young woman who is going to school to be a scientist, and she's very unsure of herself, and she is worried about her friend because two of her friends are started dating, and she's worried that they will not date because they'll be worried about her. So she ends up like fake dating this professor, and it's a professor that everybody hates because he's like a big jerk. But then she finds his sensitive side and blah, 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 right? Okay, so first and foremost, the things that I like about this book. So the banter and the relationship between Olive and Adam, the two main characters, is superb. They have really, really funny banter. It's written really well. Just their discussions and the way they talk to each other is often very funny. It's very relatable. They're very cute together. And, I think that's a big reason why people love this book so much, is because they're just two characters that you really root for to get together. And I love that for them. The overall story is pretty simple, but it's very easy to, it's a really fun, just like end of summer type of read or early fall type of read. Like, it's just really fun and light reading. So that being said, it kind of gets into my big complaint about the book, which that it is painfully predictable. I mean, it's easily one of the most predictable books I've ever read. I mean, from page like 5, I could have told you most of the things that were going to happen. And every time something is introduced, you're like, oh, well, yeah, okay, yeah. Like, there's really no surprises in the book. And I don't know. To me, it's hard because I think with a book like this, I think the book is smart in that it plays on some of the like classic tropes. Like they talk about, Olive's character even talks about specific tropes, right? Like he invites her, he's like, well, if you need a place to stay, you just stay in my room. She's like, no, I know how this goes. It's only going to have one bed. He's like, no, I ordered 2 beds. She's like, no, it's going to have 1 bed. Let me just tell you, that's how it always happens, right? So they play with tropes, they play with expectations, and I think that's fun. But it would be more fun if there were more surprises, because there really aren't. Like, it's a very, very predictable book, and you will see what's coming miles away, and sometimes it's fine because you like the characters enough that you want to see, you're even though you know what's going to happen, you're excited to see it happen to them. And sometimes it kind of hurts the book because you're like, okay, yes, okay, can we just please, when you're reading a book or when you're watching a movie or when you're watching a TV show, you never want to know, like, it's fun to know what's going to happen next, like a couple beats ahead, but when you know what's going to happen next 100 pages ahead, it can make that 100 pages to get there kind of a struggle. And I did feel that with this book a little bit. I know there's so many people that absolutely love this book, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't love this book by any means. I'm just saying for me, the predictability was a little too much. So I initially gave it a 4 out of 5. I've changed that down to a 3 out of 5 just because the book is sometimes is so predictable that it feels generic. I know there's so many people who love this book. I should just stop talking. But I do think, like I said, if you just want something light, because here's the thing, all that being said, sometimes you just want something light. Sometimes you want something that has that predictability to it because it's comfortable, right? We always talk about comfort reads. This is a comfort read. This is a book you read when you are just tired, the world has got you down, and you need some stability in your life, and that is the Love Hypothesis. It's a very stable, consistent, comfortable read, and I think that's a good thing sometimes. So that's the Love Hypothesis. If you're looking for a cute rom-com, please check it out. It is definitely 18 plus. It is definitely an 18 plus read, which, by the way, I don't know that it needed to be. I think you could have easily, there's only really one part of the book that's really 18 plus, and I think you could have easily like tamped that down for it to not be 18 plus, but I don't know that you necessarily needed to either anyway, because maybe it's good that it's 18 plus. What am I even talking about? That's the Love Hypothesis. Chances are, if you're interested in this book, you're already checking it out, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, next up, I read Not Here to Be Liked, which was by Michelle Quach. This book is an interesting story because this was sent to me by the publisher, by Epic Reads. It's like, who sent this to me? This was sent to me by Epic Reads to read and do some kind of feature of on my page. And I realized that I needed to feature it 3 days before I needed to feature it. And I was like, well, shoot, I need to read this book. So I read it in like 2 days. And that can, it was like a little frantic. But guess what? I loved it. Like, I thought it was really, really good. It actually was way better than I initially thought it was going to be. And it's funny because about halfway through the book, I turned to my husband and I said, I don't know. It's like some of the questions that are raised in this book do not have easy answers. And sometimes young adult contemporary likes to answer likes to answer questions with not easy answers with very easy answers. I think you see this a lot in books that deal with like mental health. Like they'll raise really important questions about mental health or really important mental health subjects, but then the answer, like the way that the story resolves, is so simple and so easy, and it's like, ooh, the mental health is not that clean and easy, right? And that a lot of times throws me off. So this book raises a lot of interesting questions about feminism. So this book is about a young woman who is kind of learning about feminism. And how this happens is that she is running to be the senior editor for the school paper, and she gets outvoted. Someone votes for this other guy who she doesn't think deserves it to be the senior editor. And so she kind of starts this petition basically saying that he got it because of sexism, because, you know, people are sexist towards her. And so she's kind of like learning the ropes of like feminism and sexism and misogyny, and learning kind of about these things and her opinion on these things, and how these, you know, how there's these big ideas, but how she's going to apply those to her life. And it kind of also has this enemies to lovers element to it. So halfway through the book, all these questions of feminism are being raised, and I'm like, God, if this ends with like the simple answer, like the easy ending, that's not going to be great. Like it's... I don't think the book is going to make the point it's trying to make. But luckily, the book is very smart in how it presents these ideas and how it presents her personally as a character who is learning about feminism and learning how to be a feminist herself. I especially love, she talks with her mom about feminism, and her mom, of course, coming from a different generation, has such a different take on feminism. And those were some of my favorite moments. I just thought it was so interesting and so well done. And again, it wasn't like an easy answer. There's no moment in this book where I felt like they just like put a bow on it and sent it off. And I think that's great. Like, I think the book would be excellent for like almost like a parent and a teen to read together and then like have a discussion about. There's just so many good ideas brought up in this book. It also has great representation. The characters are all super complex and super interesting. I really like, I mean, something I find a lot of times is main characters in young adult books are often like made to be very likable, because young adults can sometimes have this like black and white perspective of like a character is either really likable or really not likable. They sometimes it's difficult with characters that are more like morally gray or are just not as likable to be the main character. And I think that is definitely the case for this character. Like, she comes off very unlikable several times in the book. But I liked that she came off very unlikable because it made her very human, and it made her very realistic, and it made her very much a teenager. Not all teenagers are super likable, especially main characters like her. Like, I liked that she was sometimes I was like, ooh. I really enjoyed that about this book. So I ended up giving this book a 5 out of 5. It was just such a pleasant surprise. If you like young adult contemporary, if you want to read something that really like kind of dives deep for teens about feminism, if you want to read something with good representation, it's all here, and I highly recommend it. So that's Not Here to Be Liked. Next up, I read the second book in the Wheel of Time, The Great Hunt. This is the second time I've read this book. I read this a couple years ago, and I didn't really remember much about it except for like the ending and the beginning. So this continues our journey with Rand, Matt, Perrin, Egwene, all of the above. I forgot a lot of things happen in this book. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's like world traveling. There's horn hunting. There's a lot of things that happen in this book. I found that I liked this less the second time I read it, and I'm not sure why that is. I didn't like it significantly less, but like the first time I got to the end of this book, I was like, wow. And the second time I got to the end of this book, I was like, oh, which I guess is like a weird thing. Overall, I still enjoy Robert Jordan's writing a lot. I think he's just a really interesting storyteller. I'm really starting to notice, though, that he spends hundreds and hundreds of pages with like description, and then in the last 20 pages, it's like he realizes he needs to have like a climax to the story, and all of a sudden he's like, ooh, and then pow, 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 action, and then it ended. And I'm like, wait, what? Because that is what happened with the Eye of the World, and then this book kind of repeats that. So I'm wondering if that's going to continue. I think I'm going to still continue trying to read one of these a month. I think that's sort of my plan. Because I do eventually want to get through the whole series. Overall, I still really love the characters. I still really love the writing. I just don't necessarily love his plot format. Like this like really, really slow build to like 20 pages of like chaotic, not very well described action, and then the end of the book. I'm starting to catch on to you, Robert Jordan, and I don't know that I like it, but I like everything else about the book, so I think I'm going to keep reading. So next up, I read a very interesting book. So this was Dark and Shallow Lies. This is by Ginny Sain. This is, what an an interesting book this was. So this deals with a young woman who comes home to her hometown in Louisiana, and she lives in a town where like everybody's a psychic. So they all have like these psychic powers, but it's not like the Covenant powers. Like they're very subtle, not very often used powers, like clairvoyance, or, they have like these, all of them have these powers. And I think in a YA book, you like expect them to use these powers in really cool ways. All the powers are like barely ever used. They're very subtle. Anyway, she comes home, and recently her like best friend, her like soul sister, went missing in the swamp, and she is like kind of trying to get to the bottom of what happened to her, find out, was she murdered, was she not murdered, who did it, all of that stuff. So it's a very interesting read. It's a very slow burn. This is very much a character study. So much of the story is told through just like conversations between the different characters. So if you like slow burn stories like me, you probably really enjoy it. If you don't like slow burn stories, if you like a little bit more action, you might have a harder time with Dark and Shallow Lies. One thing I will say this book definitely gets right is the writing is gorgeous. Like there are often times where I would like reread a sentence because I'd be like, wow, that's like, wow. Like there's some really good quotes in this book. There's some really good lines. There's some really phenomenal description. You feel like you're there in this murky swamp, bayou place. Like you can feel it. The characters were all really interesting with the exception of the main character. I found the main character to be like surprisingly dull compared to all the other characters, which were super interesting. The ending of the book, I'm still kind of thinking about the ending of the book, to be honest, because listen, there are sometimes books where you finish the book and you're like, wow, I really loved that. And there's kind of like three types of books or in my head that I'm thinking about right now. So there's the book that where you finish it, you're like, I really loved it. And you just consistently think about how much you loved it, right? So for me, that's Addie LaRue. I finished Addie LaRue, absolutely adored it. To this day, a year later, I still absolutely love it, right? There are books you finish and you're like, wow, I really liked that. And then you give it a couple days and you start to think about all the problems with the book. And you're like, maybe I didn't like it as much as I did. And then there are books that you finish and you're like, I thought it was okay. And the more you think about it, the more you liked it. This falls into the third category. So when I finished it, I was like, well, that was all right. And now as several days have gone by since I read it, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, you know what? I think I liked that book. Because there's just so many interesting things in the book and there's so many interesting ideas and there's so much good writing. And I liked that it didn't do what I thought it was going to do. Like I liked that the powers when they were used were like very minimal and very subtle. I thought the ending of the book is good. Like it's a good ending. It's kind of twisty. The book is not as creepy as I thought it was going to be. I was kind of hoping for like a spooky season read. And there's some spookiness, but it's not as jarring. I thought it was going to be like scary. This book is not scary, but it's like unsettling, But I really liked this. So if you like slow burn stories, if you like things that are a little bit unsettling, if you like character studies, if you like Louisiana bayou type stories, if you like something with just a hint of paranormal, I would check out Dark and Shallow Lies because I think it's pretty good. I'm going to speak to this one really quickly. So I read Hooky. This is by Miriam, Bonastre. I'm probably mispronouncing that. This was a webtoon that was turned into a graphic novel. I'm going to speak to this one very quickly. I know there's a lot of fans of the webtoon. I thought it was okay. So here's the thing. When you read something as a webtoon, I think you're reading a page or two at a time or a chapter at a time. And I feel like it can be a little bit more like these little slices of story, right? But when you put it all together in a book, you kind of want it to have like a plot arc. And this kind of had a hard time with that. I liked the characters. I think the art is stunning. Like the art is easily my favorite part of this book. I just thought it was absolutely gorgeous. But I think there were a lot of times where it was like overwritten, like there's just too much dialogue. I feel like it kind of like beats you over the head with the dialogue a little bit. I think this may have been translated, so that may have something to do with it. Because sometimes, I don't know, sometimes things can get lost in translation. Not as often as they used to back in the day of early translations of books, but it still happens. I think for like YA or like even middle grade readers of something they want like something witchy, like witchy magic, learning to do magic. Like I said, I really liked the characters. I like the art. I just don't think there's much of a story here. And every once in a while that we'd get like a little story, be like, yes, it's finally happening. And then it would kind of go away. They kind of use like the same. There's a lot like this, the relationships between the characters and like the moments of their relationships kind of get repeated a lot. I didn't love that. So I thought it was just okay. I would definitely check it out as a webtoon first before investing in the book and see if it's your thing. And if it is your thing, check out the book because it's beautifully presented. The art is gorgeous. Just make sure it's like that you're into it before you invest in the book. I will be making a TikTok about this next book. I just haven't had a chance yet, but I definitely wanted to show it to you. So this is Gwelf, the Survivor Guide by Larry MacDougall. This is the closest thing I can say that this reminds me of is like Dinotopia back in the day, right? So this is presented as a survival guide for how to explore the city of Gwelf, which is a city inhabited by all these different animals. It tells you all the best places to. It's like a tour guide. It's like all the best places to eat, where to buy your books, the list of equipment, the places to buy magic things in case you want to go exploring in the dangerous land of the ravens. The kind of weapons the ravens might attack you with. It's basically an art book, but with like a world building element added in. And I just really loved it. The art is stunning. The way the book is presented is stunning. You will feel like you are going on a journey in this world. The writing is just as interesting and captivating. I will preface, it's not a story. There's no characters. This really is it's presented as like you're going to Gwelf. Please take this handy guide. It's like when you go to Disney World and you pick up one of those 28 things to do while you're at Disney World. It's like that, except you're going to Gwelf and you're going to meet these mice and you're going to meet some sparrows and there's magic and I really liked it. It's like a cute little coffee book table. I think if you like animal type things like I do, like Wander Home, which I showed on my page, which was a game, like stuff like Redwall, Mouse Guard, this is a no-brainer. It's really good. It's really gorgeous. I enjoyed reading it. I think sometimes you get these books for the art and then you just never read them. But I actually really enjoyed reading through the chapters, and I liked the way the story. I like how it's presented, as if you're going to visit Gwelf. Let me tell you all the things about what you need to know. And the art is stunning. So that is Gwelf. It is very niche. It's a very specific person who would be excited about this. But I know I was excited when I heard about this, and I really, really loved it. So that's Gwelf. I just recently talked about this on my TikTok, and I'm going to talk about it here again because I really loved it. So this is Major Detours. This is by Zachary, Sergi, and this is an interactive novel, which is kind of like choose your own adventure. So it deals with 4 teens. It's told from the perspective of 2 of them. They go on a summer quest before they go off to college to try and find the missing pieces, the missing 4 cards from their grandmother's tarot deck. Their grandmother passed away, left it to them, and it's missing 4 cards. They quickly discover that this tarot deck was created by a tarot enthusiast, and there are people who follow his work like crazy, and their deck is actually worth a lot of money, and they are now trying to find these cards without being hunted down by the people who are really into this stuff. It's told from 2 characters' perspectives, and there are often choices that you will then choose what your characters do next. So oftentimes you'll be asked to choose between 2 things. Your choices do matter. One of the choices I made in chapter 1 had an effect all the way till the very end of the book. I think that's really great. You can actually keep track of your choices in the back of the book. I'm going to hold this so you can't really see. And then at the end of the book, you can use those choices to do almost like a little personality test to learn more about yourself as a reader. How cool is that? I also like that the book is queer. So a lot of the different characters are queer. It deals with things like bisexuality, pansexuality, choosing your pronouns, open relationships. It deals with all of this stuff, and it lets you make choices pertaining not just to how do we find the next tarot card, but also there's moments where you get to choose if 2 characters stay together or not. If you're okay with the type of relationship they have. All of the choices felt really important, and I really, 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 really liked that. And I definitely feel like if I were to read this again and choose different choices, I would have a different experience. Overall, the story would be very similar, but I would definitely have a different experience, and there would be big moments that would be very different based on what I did a second time around. I think that's very important when you have an interactive story. You want to be able to read it a second time and have a different experience than you had the first time. I really liked this. I'm a huge fan of tarot, so I really liked that element of it. I really liked the characters. I really liked the stories. I thought it dealt with things from a queer perspective that I think sometimes get overlooked in young adult queer stories. It dealt, so the 2 boy characters, they're planning to go to separate colleges that are across the country from each other. So they're kind of navigating what their relationship is going to look like when they do that. I feel like I don't see that as much as I like to in young adult stories. And also, there's something to be said for they're navigating that. And the fact that it's written by a queer author, I think really helps, because it really helps to, I think they have a little bit more of a real discussion about what that's going to look like than I sometimes see in queer books. I also really so one of the characters, she considers herself non-binary. And I say she because she starts the story using she pronouns, and she kind of talks about the reason she does that is because she doesn't want to inconvenience people, or it's too much trouble to change her pronouns. And she kind of discovers like why she might want to change her pronouns and what they would be throughout the story. And I just really liked that. I thought that was very real. Like, it was a very realistic thing that I think, people go through, where they have these like second guess, like, well, for like, I want to go by they, them pronouns, but then I have to tell everyone that, and I have to explain that to people, and that's so much work. And I just thought it was very real, and I thought it was like a very interesting perspective for this character. I don't know. I just liked everything about this book. I love Choose Your Own Adventure. I think the choices you make are really important to the story. It really made me feel like I had control over what was happening to the characters. And I thought it was excellent. So that is Major Detours. I would highly recommend it. All right, 2 books left. So this is Small Favors. This is by Erin A. Craig. This is it's kind of like The Village. So if you've ever seen The Village by M. Night Shyamalan, we deal with this like really small town, olden days, and the main family, they have bees, and they keep bees, and they're harvesting honey from the bees, and then strange things start happening in this town, so they have to like go into the woods, and the woods, there are these scary creatures, and like creepy things start happening. It's a very like slow burn, creepy, kind of creepy out type of book. Overall, I really, really, really enjoyed it. I don't want to give too much away, but just like kind of as you find out what's going on, and as you like, there are just moments that'll make you go, ooh, like it'll give you a little shiver because they're just so creepy. I think it really like does some things that like horror movies do really well. Like there are moments where some of the characters will have like almost like visions of them doing like really bad things, and then they'll be like, oh my god, I would never do that. Like it's almost like it pops into their head. It's like kind of this like psychological thriller, but it does have some like paranormal like stuff to it. But like I said, it's very similar to like The Village. Not the ending, so don't feel like you're going to get spoiled because you know the ending of The Village. The ending is very different here. It's not like I don't want to spoil either, but it's like The Village in tone, and kind of how the story is portrayed, not The Village in like the twist at the end. It's also a book where like it's a book that is really exciting when you kind of figure out like why the title is what it is. Like, I feel like very few books do that anymore, where like when you figure out why the book is called something, you're like, oh, and this book kind of did that. I thought that was really great. Like they have this really cool moment where you're just like, everything kind of clicks into place and you're like, oh, I get it. And I liked that a lot. I liked the characters. I thought the story was creepy and spooky. It was like the perfect start to fall. Absolutely love this. So this was Small Favors. And last but not least, I just last night finished up Beasts and Beauty. This is a collection of short retellings of classic fairy tales, with illustrations, kind of like turns a lot of these fairy tales on their head, does like kind of unexpected things with them, kind of like adds in some realism to them, adds in some queerness to them, adds in some feminism to them, adds in some representation to them. And overall, it's just, it was very fun. As always happens with collections of stories, some are better than others. So some of the stories I think were really good, and I was like, whoa. Some of the stories I was like, eh. Like, overall, like Snow White was really, really well done. I really liked what they did with, like Sleeping Beauty. I thought was really interesting how he kind of changed that up. I really liked what he did with Cinderella. Like there's definitely some really good ones and some ones that are just like, no, they're okay. But overall, this is a gorgeous read. I mean, just the book itself is beautiful. The artwork is beautiful. If you like fairy tales, I think you should check it out, because it's a very fast read. But it's just the beauty of a book. And I think there's enough here for like retellings that if you like fairy tales and you like fairy tale retellings and you like seeing fairy tales kind of get turned on their head a little bit, I think you'll like this. All of the stories are super short. This is a super quick read. Perfect for spooky season. I will say, I think this is marketed as like middle grade or YA. There are moments where it does seem a little more adult in its content. Maybe not adult, but like new adult or like older YA, let's say. There's no like sexual content, but there is just like a lot of like dark, almost like violentness So I will throw that out there. Maybe check out some trigger warnings before you read this book. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was like a super cool book with like very super unique versions of these fairy tales. And I thought that was awesome. And that is everything that I read in the month of September. I read a lot of really good books. I read a lot of exciting books this month. I read a lot of thick books this month. I'm so excited for October. I'm really looking forward to reading, like, I want to read some spooky books. I want to read some creepy things. I'm finishing the Sky Without Stars trilogy. I just think October is going to be a really good month of reading for me. I'm very excited for that. So that is everything that I read in September. Let me know if you read any of these. Of course, make sure to like and subscribe. If you like my content and you want to see more of my book reviews, I post daily on TikTok. I post a couple times a week on Instagram. And of course, I post a couple times a month here on YouTube. So feel free to follow me in all the places, or one of the places, or some of the places. You do you. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful October. And as usual, happy reading.